Welcome back to another episode of App Stories. Today's episode is brought to you by ZocDoc, Clean My Mac X, and Notion. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. You know, we're back in the saddle after the review season, and it seemed like the right time to start talking about visionOS again and the Apple Vision Pro. What do you say?
Yes, we have a very fun episode ahead of us. Also, because I've been saving a bit of a surprise for you for this week's episode of App Stories. I'm gonna save it for AppStories Plus, for a plus-only segment of the show at the end of this episode. So typically we do an extra segment of App Stories for AppStories Plus subscribers before the main show. This time I'm gonna do it after the main show. And if you haven't yet checked out AppStories Plus, now would be a great time to do so, because in addition to this extra segment, and every once in a while you get these surprises and extra conversations. But AppStories Plus also comes out a day earlier and in high bitrate audio, so we sound better than ever, and it's ad-free. So you can go to appstories.plus if you want to sign up, or better yet, you can get a Club Premier subscription that includes everything we do at the club, plus, well, AppStories Plus. It's all rolled into one subscription.
Yes, all the pluses in one place.
Yes, but I'm going to save that surprise for the very end. But before we get to that, we have some announcements related to MacStories that we need to share.
We do. We've got two new writers on the MacStories staff that we introduced and welcomed to the site this week. We have Jonathan Reed. Jonathan has been helping us out for a while at Club MacStories, doing things in the Discord, as well as writing some columns in MacStories Weekly. But this week we made it official that he is now our Discord community manager, as well as a contributing author for the club. And maybe he'll show up on MacStories too. You know, he's kind of a contributing author for all of the MacStories stuff. So really great to have Jonathan on board.
And we also welcomed on the MacStories team Nilean Dorfer. Nilean, she's been an active club Discord member for years now, and I am just so thrilled. I've been meaning to ask her to write about apps and just to macOS tutorials and just the kind of content that is a perfect fit for MacStories. And we've been working with Nilean for the past couple of months. And now we made it official this week, and you will find her first articles on MacStories this week. One, it's about customizing macOS app icons, which is something that was really popular many, many years ago, but turns out is still possible today. And Nilean also wrote an excellent story about 3 different ways to use Better Touch Tool with a trackpad to sort of augment your macOS multi-window experience. And she also prepared, related to that story, a special sort of extra column for MacStories Weekly about taking things a step further with Better Touch Tool and Moom, the window manager for macOS. So these are 2 exciting additions to the MacStories staff, and we've been meaning to diversify sort of the voices that you can find on MacStories and the kind of content that you can find on MacStories for a while, and we finally had the time to sit down and do it. So I am very excited about the future of content on MacStories and the club, and this is we've been working on this for a long time, so it feels very good to finally have an expanded team.
Yeah, it's really fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to the things both of them write. You know, we have a second announcement to make, Federico, which doesn't really impact that many listeners, so I'll keep it quick.
Yeah.
But we experimented with using subscriptions through Apple Podcasts app, and we decided to pull the plug on that because it's just the better option is to go with an AppStories Plus subscription directly from us. It just costs less. You get more with it. And, we just decided we didn't need the distraction of having that extra layer of subscriptions that might confuse some people. And not that many people were taking advantage of it through the Apple Podcasts app in any event. So we have stopped offering it there. And if you want to subscribe to AppStories Plus, the best way to do that is by doing it directly through us by going to appstories.plus, or if you want to combine it with a club membership, going to plus.club, because the Club Premier membership includes all the things we do at Club MacStories as well as AppStories Plus. So that's kind of the all-in-one subscription right there. So That's it. No more Apple Podcast subscriptions, I guess, but
Yeah.
plenty of ways to subscribe in any event.
Yes.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by ZocDoc. Have you ever been in the hunt for a new doctor and you ask everyone you know for a recommendation? I mean, it makes sense to do it that way. You want a doctor who actually understands you and listens and makes you feel super comfortable. And finally, after weeks of searching, you find somebody who works. They meet all of your requirements and you call their office and they actually even have an appointment available in the near future. But then you find out that your doctor, your perfect doctor, doesn't take your insurance. But don't worry, head on over to ZocDoc to find and book a doctor who's right for you and takes your insurance. ZocDoc is a free app where you can find amazing doctors and book appointments online. We're talking about booking appointments with thousands of top-rated, patient-reviewed doctors and specialists. You can filter specifically for the ones that take your insurance, are located nearby, and treat almost any condition under the sun. These doctors all have verified reviews from actual real patients, not bots. Once you find a doctor that suits your needs, you can book them immediately with just a few taps. No more waiting awkwardly on hold with a receptionist. ZocDoc's app is incredibly simple to use. I used it when I was looking for new doctors when I moved to North Carolina. I found doctors for my entire family, myself included, and it took a lot of the hassle, time, and stress out of the entire process. I highly recommend checking it out, whether you've just moved somewhere like I did or you've just need a new doctor of some kind. It's a great way to do that. Go on over to ZocDoc.com/appstories and download the ZocDoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/appstories. ZocDoc.com/appstories. Our thanks to ZocDoc for their support of the show. All right, Federico, let's talk about visionOS because it's been a while. I mean, the dust has settled and, it's been months now since you had a chance to try out the Vision Pro at WWDC. And we thought we'd think a little bit more about some of the apps we're looking forward to trying on the Vision Pro, what we think are some of the things that Apple should be thinking about as it's talking to developers and how they can convince developers to hop on what I think is going to be a relatively low volume product, at least at the outset. And the first thing we did, though, is you and I both downloaded the Xcode beta so that we could test out the visionOS simulator.
Yes.
And I looked at your notes this morning, and you answer in these notes really what was one of my main questions for you about what it's like to use the simulator compared to the real thing. Because I got in the simulator yesterday, and I used an Xbox controller to maneuver around, kind of point the cameras and things like that. And I got to say, I found the experience pretty underwhelming and not really surprisingly so. I wasn't disappointed. I kind of expected it would be like that because here I am sitting at a desk in front of a studio display looking at a 2D representation of a 3D space and indirectly controlling where the cameras are going by using an Xbox controller instead of just turning my head. And I just imagined doing that the experience had to have been an awful lot different if you were sitting there with the headset on your head.
Yeah. So the way that I instinctively reacted to the simulator is that it's an approximation of 10% of what it feels like to use a Vision Pro and to actually use visionOS with the native hardware that it runs on. And it's almost like it's a mix of playing a third-person video game, or maybe an easier way to describe it would be it's like looking at somebody else using visionOS. It's a simulator, so obviously that makes sense. It's how can you simulate a mixed reality environment in a 2D window on your computer? I mean, it comes with the territory, right? But still, I think a lot of people may be basing their visionOS thoughts on the assumption that it's as underwhelming as the simulator, and it's not. For a variety of reasons. First of all, obviously, you are lacking the sort of the space that sort of encapsulates you all around your field of view. Like you're missing that. You're looking at a window on your computer. So you're immediately removed from the scene. And it's not your current scene. You're looking at Apple has different sort of templates, like different environments that you can try. You can be in a kitchen. You can be in a living room. You can be in a museum for some reason. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know if I was going to walk around the museum wearing a Vision Pro, but still, that's one of the included rooms in the visionOS simulator. But also, and I guess the main difference is that you cannot just turn your head around. There's no eye tracking. There's no foveated rendering. There's no you're missing that whole part of the experience, which is you put on the headset and you do the optic ID at the beginning, and you do it does the scanning of your eyes to understand how eye tracking is going to work, and then you almost forget about the fact that you're wearing the headset, because all of these UI elements, they seamlessly blend into your current environment. And here with the simulator, you can try the apps, you can try the OS, which we can talk about, but you are effectively missing the core aspect of the experience, which is you are looking at your own reality, and you can put software in the form of apps or media content around you. And that part being missing means that the simulator, like I said, is just an approximation of a very, very small percentage of what visionOS feels like on real hardware.
Right. And I think that the point you made about not being in your own environment is an important one, because that really does make it feel like an empty video game. I mean, it feels like you're playing a video game. You walked into a room, and there's literally nothing to do in the room. I mean, almost nothing to do. And if you're using a trackpad and a keyboard, it's even the experience is even worse. The Xbox controller.
That's what I did. I used a trackpad and a keyboard.
Okay, I use the Xbox controller, which helps because you've got the thumbsticks, and each thumbstick does a different thing with the camera. So it's a lot more like, in that sense, that it really did feel like playing a video game because I had a controller in my hands. But when you use the Vision Pro, you're not going to have a control in your hands. You're going to be turning your head like you would in real life. So it's a very different experience, but I still think it was useful to me because having been someone who has not tried it yet in real life, I did get a sense for, even with the limited number of apps that are available, what it is that Apple is doing with the apps, and kind of maybe a little bit of what they view as different about the experience of computing in this environment compared to something else. And one of the things that jumped out at me almost immediately, having just seen the announcement on the developer site a couple of days ago that the SF Symbols 5 set with 700 new icons is out. It's out in beta, and one of the features of that new set of icons is animation. And one thing that is very prominent, I guess, in visionOS, when you're using something like, say, Safari, and you want to go to a back button, the back button will animate to expand to show you where you're going back to. There's a lot of different elements on the screen, I guess if you can call it a screen, that animate, whether you're resizing a window or going back in a navigation stack or whatever it happens to be. And all of that looked to me an awful lot like the animations I was seeing when I was reading through what came out with SF Symbols 5.
Yeah. And the other thought that I had while I was using visionOS again, and mind you, the only time I used it was in June for 30 minutes in a room at Apple Park with 2 Apple PR people sort of guiding me through the demo. So it's not like I was free to use and do in real time whatever I wanted, but within limits, right? Because there were people telling you, now open this, now open that, now try this and try that. Whereas now I am free to open whatever I want and do whatever I want. I took some notes in the visionOS simulator using the Notes app. So that's something I was able to do. But something I noticed, broadly speaking, is that just how much, in my opinion, the sort of the skeleton of the iPadOS UI makes sense in the context of visionOS. visionOS is clearly based on, from a design perspective, from a technical perspective, as we'll see in a minute, with the apps, it is based on iPadOS. And so many of the considerations that apply to iPadOS also apply here. For example, you have these sidebars that can expand or collapse. You have these toolbar buttons that are very similar to the iPadOS version of those. And just all the apps feel like iPad versions. And if they were sort of updated for the visionOS SDK, so if they're running as native visionOS apps, they have a slightly, well, not slightly, they have a different sort of UI Chrome around them. So for example, on iPadOS, you may be used to having these white windows and like white window Chrome. So like, or at the very least, like light gray, like title bars or sidebars. Whereas on visionOS, everything is sort of translucent gray, and it's a different color scheme. And I guess it makes more sense in the context of these windows. You gotta treat them as objects, and they need to be able to reflect the current lighting conditions around you. Once again, that's another thing that you cannot fully test in the simulator.
No.
Because they can reflect the lights in the kitchen that Apple made for you or in the living room that Apple made, but it's not the same effect as actually dragging a window. You can see a light, for example, on a table with your own eyes, and when you drag the window there, you're going to see the window cast a shadow, like in real life. So that whole sort of seamless blend of virtual and physical objects, it kind of gets lost in translation with the simulator. But overall, I do believe that the iPadOS UI as a foundation for the visionOS UI makes a lot of sense, makes more sense than a macOS window Chrome, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the other place where we see some reflections of the design of visionOS is in widgets, because widgets are definitely a little bit more rounded at the corners and have kind of a similar layout to some of the things you see in the apps in visionOS. It's, this is all part of a broader evolution we've seen both on the Mac and the iPad and with widgets coming into play on all those platforms, that there's kind of a unifying theme amongst these various apps and elements on the screen that makes visionOS, I think, feel different in its own way, but also part of the overall whole as well.
Yeah.
This episode of AppStories is brought to you by Clean My Mac X. Junk files, hung processes, and malicious software can slow down even the latest, most powerful Macs, and maintaining your Apple machine, whether it's old or new, is essential for a smooth running Mac. Clean My Mac X is the all-in-one Mac maintenance tool that takes care of old junk, faulty apps, and malware in an efficient, aesthetically pleasing, and hassle-free way. And using the app's menu bar item, you can monitor your Mac's health, CPU load, and a whole lot of other stats. With nearly 30 million downloads and 15 years of experience, the app is a must-try for any Mac user. Run Clean My Mac X to keep your Mac running perfectly under macOS Sonoma. As Apple continues to pack Macs with innovative features, Clean My Mac X ensures that your hardware remains healthy and running at top performance, so you can enjoy a seamless Mac experience. I've been using Clean My Mac X for years and years now. I think it's been approaching a decade, really. And I use it for all sorts of things. In the early days, I only used it to get rid of those old junk files, things that I don't need, so I could save space on my Mac because I was really constrained for storage. These days, I use it for so much more, though. You can use it for scanning, for malware. You can use it to help you uninstall apps. You can free up RAM. You can tune up all sorts of performance parameters, which is a great way to make sure your Mac is running as fast as possible. All AppStories listeners can get 5% off of Clean My Mac X. Check out the link in the show notes now or go to macpaw.app/appstories to check it out today. That's macpaw.app/appstories or click the link in the show notes. Our thanks to Clean My Mac X for their support of the show.
So let's talk about the apps. I mean, this is a show about apps. We should talk about apps.
Yep.
There's the native apps and there's the compatible apps. And I want to start with the compatible apps. So the compatible apps are iPad apps running on visionOS in compatibility mode. That's not too different from when you try an iPad app running on a Mac. Like, for example, to all those of you who have tried, for example, Overcast running on macOS via Mac Catalyst, that's sort of the effect that you're getting in visionOS. And in this current version of the visionOS beta and simulator, some apps that are running in this mode are calendar, reminders, shortcuts, Apple News, and I don't remember the other one.
Maps. Maps is the other one, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, those are iPad apps, but once you try once you use visionOS and then you open calendar and it is not translucent, it is not gray, it's an iPad version, it looks a bit odd and out of place. And it looks like clearly running in compatibility mode, but it's not just about the visuals. There's also the fact that, for example, any visionOS app like natively compiled for visionOS, you can grab, which is an interaction that I want to talk about in a minute. You can grab and you can resize it to be a really small window, imagine like an iPhone size window, like a tall rectangle, essentially. Native apps, you can resize however you want. Compatible apps, you cannot. So they have two fixed sizes. They have a landscape size and a portrait size. So the two orientations of an iPad. But you cannot grab them and resize them, which is kind of odd because you can resize a window on iPadOS, like on an iPad.
Yeah.
You can grab calendar and make it really small. You cannot do the same on visionOS.
Right. It's as though they just built in the two largest size classes without considering the rest of it, which is odd given that all those apps can do that as well. Why don't we talk about the windows? Because I think you and I had a very similar experience in manipulating windows in the simulator, which when I first looked at it, I was like, what do I do? It took a while for me. And I think this is a factor of using it on a Mac where your instinct is to go for the title bar, right? And so what I did is I immediately I tried to grab Safari from like an empty space at the top of the window where I thought I could drag it and nothing happened. And what it turns out, what you have to do is there's a little bar at the bottom of the window that's a little bit like the home indicator on an iPhone, and that's what you actually grasp and move. And the other piece of that I think is interesting, and I'm curious what you think about, is that next to that bar at the bottom of the window is a little dot, and that dot, when you hover over it, expands, and that's how you close the windows. Because I also had a hard time I wasn't sure how to close a window at first either. Yeah,
so when you're using the visionOS simulator on a Mac, I think the problem is that your brain doesn't know what to make of it because physically you are using either a laptop or a desktop with a keyboard and mouse or trackpad. And your brain knows that you're supposed to grab a window from the top and drag it around. But that's not how it works on visionOS. Like you mentioned, you need to grab windows from the bottom. There's like this indicator that you can grab and you can move windows around. And the thing is, having tested the actual Vision Pro hardware, I can tell you that it's much, much more intuitive and natural when you're using the actual thing than it feels like and it looks like in a simulator. And I don't know what it is, but and I think it's a combination of the eye tracking and the hand recognition. It just feels so natural on visionOS you have a window there. And your brain knows, look, buddy, there's no keyboard and there's no mouse. And so your brain makes that switch, right? And it tells your hand and it tells your eyes and your hands to look at the window and look down. And look, within 30 seconds, I knew what I was supposed to do on visionOS. They told me, like, look, that's the thing you're supposed to grab with your fingers. And then you grab it and you pinch it and you can make a window bigger or smaller. And so I truly believe it's that combination of the speciality of windows, like you anchor a window somewhere. And so your brain, it's all about like fooling your brain into thinking you're using these quote unquote objects rather than looking through a simulator. So your brain knows, okay, I placed this object there and I know that I'm supposed to grab it. And so within a few minutes of using the Vision Pro, you just reach out with your hands and you can, the fact that it's a mixed reality environment and that your hands, your fingers always come through the camera and you see them, like that becomes sort of your anchor point, and you know you're supposed to grab a window there and either move it or resize it whatever you want to do. That whole interaction feels so different and so weird in the simulator, because like you, I was using it on my MacBook Air, and so many times I just went with the mouse over to the title bar at the top of a window and I tried and drag it and nothing happened, and I realized, oh yeah, this is not how it works. I knew about this, and yet now my brain just keeps doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, because I think your eyes just gravitate to the top of the window, because that's naturally what you do on a Mac, and you're so used to it that you don't even realize that your focus, your visual focus is on the top of the window as much as anything else. What's interesting to me is that what did not trip me up was resizing windows, because I saw the indicator in the corner, which reminded me immediately of the iPad and the way you resize windows on the iPad. And so I had no trouble with that at all. That immediately clicked with me.
Interesting.
This episode of AppStories is brought to you by Notion. There are a bunch of AI tools out there, and they're fun to play around with. But when it comes to something that you can actually plug into your workflow and use regularly, Notion AI is the one that will help you save time in your day-to-day work. I've been playing around with Notion AI for a bunch of different things. One is summarizing notes, because if I'm pulling together information from a bunch of different sources, it gets messy fast. And by using Notion AI, I can go in and summarize that stuff in an instant, helping me organize my notes. You can leverage the power of AI right inside of Notion across all of your notes and documents without the need to jump between your work and separate AI-powered tools. Notion AI is designed to help you with your work right in the place where you're getting your work done. That's really important, because besides doing things like summarizing your notes, you can take a page that you're collaborating on with your team members and summarize it too, and pull out the most salient points, or maybe just the action items, so you can create a task list for you and the rest of your team. There are lots of different ways to use this. And I think it's particularly well suited in a team environment, because, oftentimes you're brainstorming a new project and people are adding all sorts of things in a big outline or set of notes, and it gets complicated fast, and it's easy to get lost in those details. But with Notion AI, you can pull out, as I said, those action items, or just summarize it and get a better sense for the overall picture of the project. And then if you need to, you can go back into the details as well. Try Notion AI for free when you go to notion.com/appstories. That's all lowercase letters, notion.com/appstories, to try out the incredible power of Notion AI today. And when you use our link, you'll be supporting our show too. Try Notion AI free right now at notion.com/appstories. Our thanks to Notion for their support of AppStories.
So what do you think of the UI in general? Because like the simulator, the one nice thing it did, it gave me this newfound appreciation that maybe, I noticed it during my demo in June, but now, being able to try it at my own, with my, for as much as I want, I paid attention to more details, I guess. The depth of the UI, all these floating elements that cast a shadow. I don't know if you noticed, but when any search box, any search field is a bit recessed into the UI, sort of like it feels like it's a layer down, and that's not something that feels as realistic, I guess, necessarily in a 2D UI like on macOS. Right. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, even if you try to design a skeuomorphic UI, for lack of a better word, on iPadOS or macOS by adding shadow effects or depth effects or whatever, different materials, they still do not feel as realistic or as deep as in visionOS. And you can notice these differences from the simulator. It's even more pronounced when you use the hardware.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting idea here from a design standpoint about how Apple moved with iOS 7 to very flat UIs. And to this day, most of the UIs that we deal with on all of Apple's platforms are fairly flat. And now we're returning to more of a 3D UI. And I don't think that this signals that we're going to start seeing more of that on things like the Mac or the iPad or the iPhone. I mean, I have heard people say that this might be a return to those skeuomorphic days and heavy shadows and layers and that sort of thing. But I feel like Apple has decided that when you have a 2D plane, you have some sort of screen that you're working with. The flat design, by and large, is what works. It's not entirely flat. I mean, we still have shadows and cast by windows on the Mac and things like that. But a flatter UI works better than it does with visionOS, where you really are operating in the 3D space. And so having 3D elements works well. What I think about the apps that's really cool is that not only do they have that kind of 3D element to them, but the controls largely stay out of your way. There's a very clear focus on whatever the content happens to be. So as I kind of described before, when you're in Safari, those back buttons shrink down to something smaller. And those search boxes are just the spyglass or the magnifying glass icon, and they expand when you click into them. Now, we've seen things like that on other platforms, but here everything feels a little bit more vivid and alive. And when they're not being interacted with, they just kind of fade more into the background, I think, than they do on other platforms.
Yeah. I want to talk about the input methods using visionOS with the keyboard. There are keyboard shortcuts throughout the OS, which is nice. And I mean, I was using my MacBook's keyboard and trackpad, and it's not ideal, but I took a few notes. All the keyboard shortcuts, like all the usual suspects, were there. Mm-hmm. But in thinking about like what's it gonna be like next year when I'm gonna have a Vision Pro, and say that like I want to get some work done from the couch, right? I just want to hang, in the living room and get some work done for a couple of hours while wearing a Vision Pro. Obviously, there's going to be a software keyboard, which I was not able to try. Or maybe I tried it very briefly. I don't remember. I don't think I tried it in my demo. So you're going to be able to sort of, type in the air on a virtual keyboard with your hands in front of you. But you will also be able to pair an external keyboard, I believe, and trackpad. And obviously, you will also be able to use a MacBook, like a Mac, and sort of cast the screen of the Mac to the Vision Pro. Mm-hmm. Now more than ever, I truly believe that Apple should consider making a Magic Keyboard that supports multi-device pairing and sort of a Magic Keyboard. This is my dream, and I think I mentioned this before. A Magic Keyboard and a Magic Trackpad, while they're at it, that has the same multi-device switching features of AirPods.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought you were going to say. Yeah, the technology's there, and we've talked about this sort of thing before in the context of a controller, how we thought that Apple could do an amazing controller using some of the AirPods technology. And a lot of that technology would work just as well with a trackpad and a keyboard, so that you can pair it whether you're using your iPad or your Vision Pro. I think that would be fantastic, because what I don't have a sense for from the simulator is you can pull up a software keyboard, and because you're having to peck at those letters and numbers using a trackpad, I just don't have a sense for what that will be like. It's just too far removed from actually using it to know how easy that will be to use.
And so, yeah, that's my dream, to have one keyboard that I can move between rooms, that I can move between devices. And instead of having to do what I do now, which is I have a Logitech keyboard and a Logitech mouse, and I really dislike using a mouse, but also I would dislike having multiple trackpads more and label them because I cannot make out which one is which. So, yeah, we'll see. But I really do hope that Apple makes the AirPods version of keyboard and trackpad eventually.
Yeah, that would be great. It would be really great. We should talk, I think, too, Federico, a little bit about where we think apps are going on this platform and what Apple might be doing or should be doing to kind of attract developer support for visionOS and the Vision Pro. I mean, it's got to be a little tough because, at least the rumors and the reports are that there's going to be something less than 500,000 units available in the first year. And that's just not a lot for any particular developer to make a lot of money on visionOS, at least not at the front end. And so I got to imagine that companies like Microsoft or Adobe look at this and they're like, well, there's not a lot of money in this for us. On the other hand, we did see at WWDC that Microsoft is working with Apple to bring apps to the Vision Pro. And then the other question is the other end of the spectrum, which is indie developers and whether they should be focused on this or not. And I don't know. I mean, I guess there's a lot to talk about both of these. I think when it comes to big companies, it's a little less interesting because I've got to assume that there are deals being struck behind the scenes between Apple and companies like Microsoft to ensure that these apps that are used by bigger businesses are being brought to visionOS. And ultimately, if you're building a headset that costs $3,500 plus, you have to imagine that that's the kind of thing that may appeal to an enterprise type of situation where you've got a big business, multinational business willing to buy a certain number of these for the people in their company to do various things. So I think that while Apple has to be sure that those kind of apps, those enterprisey apps are there, I think it probably makes a lot of sense there as a long-term project for the likes of Microsoft or maybe, Google with its Google Suite and a bunch of other companies. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we're going to see, I think we are going to see Apple working with these big companies to sort of incentivize them to bring their most popular apps to Vision Pro. And I think it's pretty much a given that we can expect versions of Office, like the Office suite of apps running on Vision Pro. And I do think that Apple, most likely what will happen, we're going to see Adobe make like visionOS specific versions of some of their artistic creation apps. Like I'm sure Adobe is playing around with the idea of having a product like a version of Photoshop or whatever that lets you draw in the air or something, right? I think it's going to be a while for the more complex apps from Adobe before we see them on Vision Pro. I do think at the same time, though, that media companies will be all over this. Like bigger companies, I think even if this thing is going to be expensive and the market is going to be limited, I think Apple will do whatever they can to convince them to bring, the Netflix or, hard to judge with Spotify. But I think in general, movies and TV shows, they make a lot of sense in this kind of environment.
I was going to say, you could also see perhaps like special tiers for visionOS of various subscriptions where it's like, oh, you'll get the visionOS Netflix experience, which will be, it'll be in what the special format for visionOS, and they may charge a premium for that.
Yeah, and maybe we're looking at the kind of future where where these companies, they make like generalized AR, VR, or mixed reality versions of their apps, and they
like tvOS.
No, but like what I'm trying to say is maybe Netflix will make one type of experience that runs on the Meta Quest, it runs on the Vision Pro, it runs on other types of headsets, instead of having to address individual platforms. Or maybe I'm wrong, but usually these companies, they like to develop once and address multiple platforms at the same time. But I don't know. I could see Netflix saying something like, well, if you want to watch in 4K on your TV, it costs this much every month. If you want to watch in 4K and on AR and VR headsets, now you got to give us $25 or something. Like that sort of thing. And that more expensive tier gets you access to versions of Netflix on the Meta Quest or Apple Vision Pro. Just an idea.
Yeah, no, I could see that. And I think that is the risk probably, though, with the Netflixes of the world, is that there's kind of a lowest common denominator thing that might go on, which happens with a lot of the video players on tvOS, where they don't adopt the Apple TV specific features. They just build a very bare bones video player. The other category, of course, is the one that we cover a lot more on MacStories, which is the apps from independent developers. And I think that it's a hard choice for a lot of indie developers, but I do think that you can look at other new platforms that Apple has introduced over the years and see the potential for expanding into this and getting in on the ground level. I mean, I think no one really exemplifies that more than someone like David Smith, who got in at the ground level on watchOS. And watchOS has not been a huge third-party app platform, but he knows it better than anybody else. And that experience in developing for watchOS helped him when it came to widgets, when widgets came to iOS, and he ultimately made Widgetsmith. So I think that there is potential there if someone's willing to make the investment in learning this from the ground up and being kind of an expert from the get-go. I think that there's something to that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the lowest common denominator is exactly what we are not going to see from indie developers.
Right.
It's always been Apple's strongest advantage compared to other platforms, right? To have a strong, vibrant community of developers that are ready to support a new platform from day one, right? With native experiences. So I think whether it's about, again, media apps or apps related to photos, or I even think there's actually a market for productivity apps. Maybe this is not going to be like, would I edit my iOS 18 review on a Vision Pro? I guess we'll see next year when it comes down. Would I write my visionOS 1.0 review on the Vision Pro? I don't know. But I do think there's room for iPad apps updated for Vision Pro. Some types of experiences likely won't make sense on it. Like, for example, cooking apps and recipe apps. I don't think we're probably going to see someone make a visionOS version of those. But like, I don't want to walk around in my kitchen and, cook pasta for dinner while wearing a Vision Pro. Like,
right.
Also because my girlfriend wouldn't let me do it. She's gonna kick me out of the house if she catches me doing that. But I do think for more stationary sort of workflows, I think it's gonna make a lot of sense to have that sort of setup. I think we are going to see lots of, if Apple's gonna allow them, that is. Well, I think we're gonna see a lot of third-party web browsers, alternative web browsers with different ideas to Safari for the Vision Pro. And I think, I think media is going to be the big one. Imagine Plex for visionOS, for example.
That would be,
sweet.
Yeah, that would be kind of cool. That would be cool. And I had this weird moment, though, too, when I was thinking about this. And at first, I was a little skeptical about the productivity angle. But then I did kind of think back again to what we talked about recently, which was when I put that iPad mini in a clamp on the seat back of an American Airlines flight, and then had the tray table for my keyboard. And I had all this space, and I had the screen right there floating in front of my eyes. And I realized, well, you know what? Having the headset on and having the screen wherever you happen to be looking really does open a lot more possibilities about where you can work. Maybe you're sitting in bed, propped up, on some pillows, or I don't know, sitting out on your balcony or on the couch. I mean, you can, whatever's comfortable. I think you can free yourself from sitting at a table or a desk potentially.
Yeah.
Federico, I think we should close out by talking about games. And, I think there wasn't much of a game message. There wasn't much of a game message at WWDC, and one hasn't really emerged in the months since then. And what little we have seen, like we saw some screenshots of What's the Golf, I think it was, being played on Vision Pro. When we saw the Unity engine announced, or at least some more information announced about it over the summer, but we haven't seen much beyond that. And I think this is going to be kind of a wait and see category more than anything else. What's the Golf is a good game, but it's very much of the Apple Arcade type of family-oriented game, which, some of those might translate really well into visionOS, but it doesn't sound like there are necessarily big developers of like AAA games lining up to make games for this yet.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And the thing about visionOS and gaming is that it doesn't seem like there's much of a gaming story to begin with. And I feel like Apple wants to go all in with this idea of games that you can play just by using your hands. And I am going to give Apple the benefit of the doubt here, and maybe I'm wrong, because there's a lot of really smart people working on the visionOS team. But I mean, this whole conversation is kind of odd because we're having this conversation while on the iPhone and most likely on the iPad and on the Mac next, we are literally talking about the likes of Assassin's Creed and Resident Evil and Death Stranding becoming games that you can play on a phone and that you can play with a controller if you want. If we are talking about like, okay, is the Vision Pro gonna be able to run Resident Evil 4 remake in a window? So we're not talking about a proper 3D experience here. Mm-hmm. Let's just talk about the game that you're projecting, and that's what Apple showed for the Vision Pro introduction, right? Let's say that you're projecting a game in front of you, and the Vision Pro maybe it's going to be compatible with console controllers. You can hold the controller and play a console game on a giant screen in front of you.
Right.
Now that, I mean, I'll take it. But if we are talking about games specifically designed for AR on the Vision Pro and hand recognition, I just don't think that's a thing that's going to happen. Maybe it's going to happen with easier, in the sense of like easier experiences, like arcade games or puzzle games or multiplayer games. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's realistic to expect an AR version of Resident Evil 4 that you can just play with your hands and be like pew pew as you shoot zombies.
Finger guns, yeah.
Finger guns as you shoot zombies. I just don't think that's gonna be the case. But again, super happy to be proven wrong.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll just have to see what comes to pass there. All right, Federico. Well, it was a good conversation. It's been a while since I've thought about the Vision Pro, so it was kind of fun to do that again today. I want to thank our 3 sponsors for this episode. That's ZocDoc, Clean My Mac X, and Notion. You can find the 2 of us over at MacStories.net. Federico and I are both on Mastodon too. Go to Viticci.MacStories.net and JohnVorhees.MacStories.net to follow us. And we're on Instagram, where Federico is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.